And just so folks know, we will only be interpreting the Cuban speakers and the Q&A. We will not be translating the entire program into Spanish. So, my name is Cindy Domingo, and I am the chair of U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and also the co-chair of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom's Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. And I want to welcome you here today as we welcome our Cuban sisters who are here for the United Nations Committee on the Status of Women. And it is always a joy for this conference to happen because we finally get to see our Cuban sisters live with us to be able to speak for themselves. And, you know, we have the collaboration and we'll have sent 3 of our sisters to welcome them and to work with them in New York. Cynthia Roberts, Moon Vasquez, who you see in the picture there with our Cuban sisters, and Jan Strout, who will be my co-host today. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you especially to our Cuban sisters who have joined us in this webinar entitled U.S. Government Blockade, the Road to Full Equality for Cuban Women. We chose this topic because at this time, given the advances that Cuban society has made, led by the Federation of Cuban Women, we believe that the main impediment to further advancement for Cuban women and girls, and thus all of Cuban society, is the inhumane U.S. blockade that is creating economic scarcities and shortages, medical suffering and deaths, migration out of Cuba in great numbers, and family separation and racial tensions. And as we know, when you have these conditions, it is women and children who suffer disproportionately from these conditions. March gives us great opportunities to honor women and our contributions and uplift our movements as we celebrated International Women's Day, Women's History Month this month, and the UN Commission on the Status of Women. As I said, 3 of our sisters are with our Cuban sisters, joining hundreds of other women and some men to review the gains and setbacks of governments in relationship to the 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. That is the key global policy document on gender equality, focusing on 12 critical areas of concern. It is at the CSW that the Cuban government, through its delegation, of which 2 of our 3, hopefully, of our speakers are part of, showcases the advancements of Cuban women in their struggle for gender equality, and that is what we will hear about in this webinar. Before Jan goes through the agenda and introduces herself, I just want to say a few sentences about our main co-sponsoring organizations. The U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration was founded in the early 2000s with the mission of building a U.S. women's movement dedicated to ending the U.S. government blockade against Cuba and to creating mutually beneficial U.S.-Cuba relations. Our work advances the rights of all women in the context of universal human rights. And we have 4 campaigns that you can find out more about by visiting our website, womenincuba.org. Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee is a program of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the oldest women's peace organization in the world, and it is over 100 years old. WILF has stood in opposition to the blockade at an international and national level and has actively organized its sections and branches to lift the blockade. We work in close collaboration together with these organizations as we have the same goals and purposes. And lastly, the Federation of Cuban Women was founded in 1960, led by Velma Espin as president until her death. Its main goal is to organize, educate, and mobilize for the full equality of women and girls so that they can fully participate in Cuban society at every level. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jan.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Amy, for all of your support in getting us together, being on screen, and also Deb for that fabulous slideshow I'll refer to in some closing remarks. Thank you so much. Just very, very moving. And again, we're so happy to be here with our Cuban sisters and with women of the world who inspire us, who help us make better decisions, and help us truly build a global women's movement with support of these co-sponsors, and I want to honor them. We have, in addition to, of course, the collaboration and the Women's International League, we have the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights, the National Dominican Women's Caucus, with my co-partner here, the president of that, you'll hear from her soon. The Women's Intercultural Network, they coordinate the National Cities for CEDAW, which has been a very important part of the accomplishments that Cuba has made in advancing the status of women. We have the Women of Vision. We have Code Pink, Women for Peace, the Literacy Project, the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Committee, the Center for Cuban Studies, who I will give a shout out because they have an exhibit here in Brooklyn that is centered on Cuban women artists for Women's History Month. For those of us in New York, if you have a chance to see that, it is a special event. And last but never least is LILO, a legacy of equality, leadership, and organizing, who is there for us in so many ways. I'm just going to mention the 3-4 areas that are comprising our agenda tonight. They're all worth an hour or 90 minutes each, but we're going to fit them all into the 90 minutes that we have. But the first one is to talk about the status and achievements of women and girls' rights in Cuba, which will include the human rights and LGBTQIA and beyond rights, especially with the new Cuban Constitution that Cindy referenced already. So we'll have, that is the first block of information and interaction. The second will be looking at the impacts of the US blockade and the challenges to achieving full equality and economic security, not only for women, but the diversity of women and girls and the human rights of all Cubans. The third part will be looking at advancing global women's human rights, and we'll have a chance to hear more from you all, in addition to some earlier questions about what are your priorities and calls to action that we'd like to add to Zenaida's and some of my own. We will then take some further discussion on that, and Cindy will follow it with the actions of solidarity, which the collaboration and will have jointly been pursuing. We will then have open-ended discussion, and we'll be closing just near 8 o'clock. So that should be a very filling hour and a half, and you will all make it possible. So thank you for being here. I want to introduce the first section, as I mentioned, and the speakers with that section. That is the one which is going to cover the status and accomplishments of women and girls in Cuba, the human rights agenda, LGBT, and the new Cuban Constitution. That will begin with Osmaida Hernandez, who is the head of the Department of the International Relations of the Federation of Cuban Women. That is our sister organization. She will be followed by another sister and another sister organization, and that is Alicia Campos Perez. She is coordinator of the Democratic Federation of Cuba, which is, the Democratic Federation of Women, or FEDIM. And then last but never least in this section is Lenny Villagomez Rivas, who is co-coordinator of our co-sponsoring organization, the WILPS Cuba and Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. So those 3 speakers, possibly a fourth, but for sure these 3 will be discussing the status and achievement of women and girls in Cuba. So please take it away, Osmaida, and it's so good to see you.
Muy buenas noches. Quiero agradecer a Cindy por la brillante idea de organizar este encuentro y de igual manera a las demás organizaciones que han sido mencionadas anteriormente. Y nos da mucha alegría podernos reencontrar en este espacio para intercambiar sobre los avances que ha alcanzado Cuba en materia de igualdad de género y de participación de las mujeres en la sociedad, y también discutir cuáles son los desafíos que hoy enfrentamos las cubanas ante el bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero que impone el gobierno de Estados Unidos a nuestro país. Entonces, sigo. Ay, qué maravilla. Y yo creo que Cindy hacía referencia a cuál ha sido el papel que ha jugado la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, una organización que agrupa en su seno a más de 4.300.000 mujeres, mujeres que a partir de los 14 años de edad deciden incorporarse como miembros activos de esta organización, que solo tiene como principio el principio de voluntariedad. Es una organización heterogénea en su composición, es decir, que forman parte de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, mujeres con diferente orientación sexual, mujeres con diferentes orientación o identificación religiosa, con diferente color de la piel, es decir, mujeres de todos los sectores de la sociedad. Y eso es algo que ha engrandecido esta organización, que este próximo 23 de agosto estará cumpliendo 64 años. Como bien decía Cindy, los logros alcanzados por las mujeres cubanas en materia de igualdad, de participación política, económica y social están expuestos en cualquiera de los escenarios. Y por supuesto, nosotras lo decimos con mucho orgullo, que ha sido también el resultado de la lucha de las mujeres cubanas, incluso mucho antes del triunfo revolucionario de enero del 59, cuando existían en el país varias organizaciones femeninas que también desarrollaban un fuerte movimiento feminista para lograr derechos que hoy son una realidad en nuestro país. Las mujeres cubanas hemos sido durante estos 66 años de la revolución y 64 años de creada la organización, no solo hemos participado, sino que hemos sido protagonistas de la obra de la revolución. No hay un sector de la sociedad cubana donde no esté presente la obra y la impronta de la mujer. Hay sectores que son distintivos de la presencia femenina. Por supuesto, como al igual que muchos sectores en el mundo, el sector de la salud, el sector de la educación, son mayoría las personas que trabajan en estos sectores, son mujeres, la mayoría. Pero si vamos al sector de la salud, hay una particularidad muy especial, y es que más del 64% de los integrantes de las brigadas de colaboración médica que hoy en el mundo entero brindan sus servicios de manera altruista son mujeres. Es decir, integran estas brigadas de colaboración médica, el 64% de estas personas son mujeres. Y eso para nosotros es un gran orgullo, decir que las mujeres cubanas también están presentes en estos espacios. Las mujeres cubanas hemos sabido aprovechar muy bien estos logros y estas opciones que nos ha dado la revolución, si tenemos en cuenta que somos mayoría las graduadas en las universidades cubanas. Más del 60% de las personas que se gradúan en las universidades cubanas son mujeres. Y de esa misma manera podemos hablar en su participación en la vida económica, de igual manera en otros sectores que también están feminizados prácticamente. Estamos hablando del sector jurídico, por ejemplo. Nosotras con orgullo decimos que más del 80% de los jueces y fiscales en Cuba son mujeres. El sector de la ciencia, que conocemos además que es un sector que en el mundo entero hay baja presencia de mujeres, en Cuba ocurre todo lo contrario. Más del 53% de los científicos en Cuba son mujeres, y fueron precisamente las mujeres las que durante la pandemia de la COVID-19 desarrollaron y protagonizaron más de los 900 proyectos de investigación que se hicieran, no solo para lograr esas vacunas que salvaron la vida de las cubanas y los cubanos y que también han salvado la vida de muchas personas en el mundo, sino también en otros proyectos de investigación donde la presencia femenina ha sido mayoritaria. Yo podría hablar de igual manera de otros espacios donde la participación de la mujer ha sido o es trascendental. En la región de América Latina y el Caribe, cuando se habla de lograr la plena autonomía de las mujeres, se hace referencia particularmente al logro de 3 autonomías, que es la autonomía física, la autonomía en la toma de decisiones y la autonomía económica. Y nosotras podemos decir que las mujeres cubanas han logrado la autonomía, porque en primer lugar, las mujeres cubanas tienen autonomía física, es decir, tienen autonomía sobre el derecho a decidir sobre sus cuerpos. Y yo creo que eso es algo que también ha sido una de las luchas que han llevado durante muchos años varias organizaciones femeninas, amigas en el mundo, porque no pueden o no disfrutan de este derecho que hoy tienen conquistado las mujeres cubanas. Desde el año 1965, las mujeres tienen el derecho de practicar la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo. Sabemos que es uno de los derechos en los cuales ha habido un retroceso fundamentalmente en la región. Sin embargo, en nuestro país, desde el año 1965, las mujeres cubanas tienen ese derecho garantizado de una manera gratuita, de una manera además que tiene que ser en una institución de salud. Hace muy pocos meses se llevó a la Asamblea Nacional del Poder Popular la presentación de la nueva Ley de Salud Pública, donde quedó proscrito que la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo se hace precisamente en instituciones de salud certificadas y con la profesionalidad que esto requiere. Y de igual manera tenemos el derecho sobre nuestros cuerpos de decidir la cantidad de hijos que vamos a tener, el espacio en que vamos a tener esos hijos, es decir, o si no vamos a tener nuestros hijos, también es un derecho que tienen las mujeres a decidir sobre sus cuerpos, si van a ser madres, si no lo van a hacer. Es decir, esto es algo que es importante para todas nosotras. De igual manera, el tema en la autonomía económica. En Cuba, las mujeres disfrutan, en primer lugar, del derecho de desempeñarse en un empleo digno. Tienen el derecho además de recibir igual salario por trabajo de igual valor que los hombres, que es un derecho que reclaman muchas mujeres en el mundo y sobre todo aquí en los Estados Unidos, donde está demostrado que ganan 65, algo así, $, menos que los hombres, incluso ocupando las mismas responsabilidades. No es el caso de nuestro país. En Cuba, mujeres y hombres ganan los mismos salarios, salarios y desarrollan la misma responsabilidad. Y de igual manera ocurre con las garantías relacionadas con la licencia de maternidad de las madres trabajadoras. Y cuando nos referimos a las madres trabajadoras, no solo nos estamos haciendo referencia a las madres que trabajan en un sector, ya sea en el sector estatal o en el sector no estatal, sino que es un derecho que está proscrito en el Código de Trabajo de la República de Cuba, que está previo también a actualizarse y que deja claro que los derechos laborales, tanto para las madres, es para las madres trabajadoras de cualquier de estos sectores. Y cuando hablo de las madres me refiero a un derecho, a un decreto ley que ha sido modificado en los últimos 5 años, que es el decreto ley de la madre trabajadora y de responsabilidad de las familias. Y cuando digo que ha sido modificado en los últimos 5 años, hago énfasis en los últimos 5 años porque todas conocemos cuáles han sido las condiciones que ha vivido el mundo y Cuba no ha estado exenta de ello en medio de una pandemia que ha afectado y que ha traído consecuencias nefastas y que ha exacerbado las desigualdades de género en todo en el mundo, especialmente en la región de América y el Caribe. Sin embargo, Cuba, en medio de toda esta situación, del recrudecimiento del bloqueo, de la inclusión de Cuba en la lista de países que supuestamente patrocinan el terrorismo, además de estar viviendo esa crisis global post pandemia, Cuba en todos estos años ha actualizado su marco normativo jurídico, ha actualizado todo lo referente a este decreto ley de la maternidad, otorgando mayores garantías y mayores protección, no solo a la madre trabajadora, sino también al padre, a las abuelas, a los abuelos, maternos o paternos que sean trabajadores y que les permite disfrutar de un año de licencia de maternidad retribuida y que ahora, recientemente, a partir de las nuevas medidas que se aprueban en el país para corregir y para avanzar en la economía, este derecho se amplía a 15 meses. Quiere decir, ¿qué pasaba en Cuba antes de que ocurriera esto? Las madres, al niño, al bebé cumplir un año de edad, tenía el derecho a regresar a su puesto de trabajo, porque además otra garantía que tiene la madre trabajadora, que no pierde el vínculo de su puesto laboral, es decir, al año se reincorpora a su puesto de trabajo. Y muchas de estas madres, cuando cumplían el año, no tenían aún la capacidad, por ejemplo, para el círculo infantil, o el bebé aún no caminaba, no tenía cierta independencia, y las madres teníamos el derecho de solicitar una licencia sin sueldo por 3 meses. Ahora, esta licencia que solicitaban las madres por 3 meses sin sueldo también es retribuida monetariamente, por lo tanto, se extiende hasta los 15 meses. Y por supuesto, algo que también distingue esta ley, este decreto ley de la maternidad en Cuba, es que es un decreto ley al cual también se pueden acoger los padres, las abuelas y los abuelos, y también reciben esa prestación monetaria. Por lo tanto, esos son derechos que tenemos conquistados las mujeres cubanas. Y así, de igual manera, podemos hablar de la autonomía en la toma de decisiones si tenemos en cuenta que en Cuba las mujeres en el Parlamento, nuestro órgano el principal órgano legislativo del país, las cubanas representan el 55% de los parlamentarios. Es decir, Cuba representa es el segundo país del mundo con presencia femenina en este órgano. Y de igual manera lo podemos ver en el Consejo de Estado, en el Consejo de Ministros y en otras responsabilidades también. Quiere decir, y si vamos a los órganos locales, de igual forma. Ahora, todos estos logros que han alcanzado indudablemente las mujeres cubanas con relación a la participación y el empoderamiento en la sociedad, solo es consecuencia, bueno, en primer lugar, de tener una revolución social socialista, que ha sido el primer programa de igualdad que hemos disfrutado las cubanas desde enero del 59. Por eso nosotras decimos que uno de los objetivos que tiene la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, por supuesto, además de lograr la plena igualdad de la mujer en la sociedad, es defender esa obra de justicia social que es y ha sido la revolución, porque sí ha habido un sector de la sociedad que ha sido verdaderamente beneficiado, ha sido el sector femenino. Yo voy a darle la palabra a Alicia para que también ampliar sobre cuáles han sido todo lo que se ha hecho en materia de actualización de las normas jurídicas luego de haberse aprobado en 2019 una constitución de la República de Cuba, una constitución de la República de Cuba que fuera aprobada a través de referendo popular después de haberse realizado todo un proceso de consulta con el pueblo, y que esta nueva constitución de la República, sin lugar a dudas, garantiza la igualdad efectiva entre hombres y mujeres en la sociedad, y también garantiza el disfrute y el derecho el disfrute y los derechos de las mujeres a vivir una vida libre de violencia, a obtener mayores niveles de equidad y de justicia social, así como garantiza la dignidad plena de las personas y su desarrollo integral. A partir de la aprobación de esta nueva Constitución de la República, se han actualizado un grupo importante de normas jurídicas, entre ellas el Código de las Familias, que ahorita también mencionábamos, y que me gustaría que Alicia pudiera abordar también sobre estas cuestiones, como ha sido un documento, un documento que realmente lo que ha hecho es ampliar los derechos y las garantías que tenemos las cubanas y los cubanos en la sociedad.
Bueno, buenas tardes nuevamente. Buenas tardes nuevamente. Yo quiero reiterar el agradecimiento a las compañeras por darnos esta oportunidad cada año y tener en cuenta siempre lo que significamos para la Revolución Cubana las mujeres. Bueno, como decía Osmaida, ciertamente hemos tenido un grupo de normas jurídicas que se han ido actualizando y que se han ido modificando a partir de la modificación, y valga la redundancia, de nuestra Constitución. Y quería partir de que la Constitución, como ley de leyes, en su articulado tiene dos conceptos esenciales. El primero es que el socialismo en Cuba es irrevocable. Por tanto, tener una constitución que avale la defensa del socialismo hace que las cubanas, por supuesto, seamos parte de la defensa de ese socialismo y de la defensa de la revolución. Ese es un primer concepto de nuestra constitución. Socialismo como por supuesto, sistema social de humanismo, de defensa de la dignidad de hombres y mujeres, en fin. Y segundo, el tema de la igualdad. Es un Estado de Derecho, o sea, que nuestra sociedad es un Estado de derechos y de justicia social, y por supuesto el tema de la igualdad entre todas las personas. Y es importante que nuestra Constitución asume cuando habla de igualdad de todas las personas independientemente de las orientaciones diferentes en diferentes ámbitos de la vida. Y quería dejar esto claro porque a partir de aprobar la nueva constitución o la constitución con sus modificaciones, pues luego se ha adecuado el código de familia, del cual me voy a referir posteriormente, el código de trabajo. Perdón, el código de trabajo está por adecuarse, pero el código penal, los códigos de proceso, están los procedimientos también para todo el tema de proceso penal. En fin, ha salido decretos que son soporte para todo esto, por supuesto, también leyes y códigos, en fin. Ahora, con el código de familia. El código de familia, nosotros el año pasado recuerdo que hicimos una breve referencia también al código, pero me gustaría apuntar 3 elementos del código de familia. Primero, es un código para todas las familias y es un código para todas las personas. Por tanto, el código, en ese primer elemento que quiero apuntar, el código ha sido muy criticado por las personas que están en contra de nuestro proceso revolucionario y por parte de los enemigos, precisamente porque apuntan a un grupo de artículos en el código que pretenden desvirtuar lo que con el código queremos lograr. Y digamos, me estoy refiriendo, por ejemplo, al artículo del código que habla del matrimonio igualitario, o sea, del matrimonio entre, perdón, que tenemos un entuerto aquí.
Estamos en un closet aquí
Sí.
chiquitito también.
Del matrimonio igualitario. El código habla además, digamos, del derecho de la responsabilidad parental, o sea, que el término de patria potestad se va del código y se incluye la responsabilidad parental, concepto que también nos han criticado. El tema del vientre solidario, que nos los han criticado y para nada tiene que ver con la comercialización de ese tema. Y por supuesto han aprovechado todos esos nuevos conceptos que son muy adelantados para el mundo. O sea que nuestro código es uno de los códigos más adelantados, no solo en términos de derechos, sino en términos humanos en el mundo. Y para la actualización de este código, por supuesto, hubo muchas versiones. Yo diría que fueron como 23 o casi 30 versiones las que se hicieron para llegar al último código. Fue un código que fue a referendo popular. Fue un código además que fue a consulta de toda la población y de las organizaciones de masa en el país. Y resultó que los enemigos de la revolución apostaron al tema de los articulados que podían chocar o que podían estar en contradicción con algunos preconceptos o prejuicios que todavía tiene la sociedad, al revés el tema de la votación. Sin embargo, el código se aprobó y el código se está implementando paulatinamente, pero con éxito. Al decir de nuestro presidente, el código de las familias en Cuba es un código de amor, es un código de humanismo y es un código, por supuesto, para todas las personas independientemente de su manera de ser, de actuar y de manifestarse. Eso es con el código de la familia, que por supuesto tiene mucho que ver con también la emancipación de la mujer, con la garantía de los derechos de la comunidad LGBTI que tiene que ver además con que en Cuba, independientemente, como decía hace un rato, que aún existen prejuicios con estos temas, hay una voluntad política y hay toda una apertura a que hablamos de todos los derechos para todas las personas. O sea, que esa es nuestra máxima. Y por supuesto, con muchos a veces vericuetos en el camino, pero en pos de una instrumentación y de una aplicación exitosa del código de familia. Permítanme además del código, porque yo sé que había interés de que habláramos de eso, y yo no soy jurista como para meterme en asuntos técnicos. Les hablo desde el punto de vista general, pero me gustaría decir que recientemente también se aprobó en Cuba. Osmaida hablaba de una estrategia integral de violencia de violencia de género y también quisiera hablarles en un minuto, si me lo permiten, de que está aprobado como decreto presidencial el programa para el adelanto de las mujeres. Programa para el adelanto de las mujeres que contiene varias áreas de acción y dentro de esas áreas de acción, indicadores que tienen que ver con el adelanto de las mujeres en Cuba en todos los ámbitos de la vida económica, política, social y familiar. Y este programa de adelanto de las mujeres no es otra cosa que el perfeccionamiento el programa de acción de Beijing que tuvimos en Cuba, el plan de acción de Beijing que tuvimos en Cuba desde que fue la conferencia de Beijing. Tuvimos 3 actualizaciones de nuestro plan de acción, que fue firmado ese plan de acción por nuestro comandante en jefe, Fidel Castro, y la actualización de esas medidas que estaban en ese plan devino también, entonces, nuestro plan para el adelanto de la quería referirme a esto porque me parece que es bien interesante porque es uno de los logros de estos tiempos. Pero, hablando de las mujeres cubanas, yo no quisiera para nada faltar a mi condición de coordinadora de la oficina regional de la Federación Democrática Internacional de Mujeres, que atiende, o que coordina, y valga la redundancia, América y el Caribe, para en 2 minutos transmitir la abismal diferencia que tenemos hoy las cubanas en materia de derechos, en materia de protección de la legislación y en materia de empoderamiento en el orden económico y social y político, por supuesto, en Cuba con nuestras mujeres, nuestras compañeras de América y el Caribe. Y por ejemplo, hoy decirle que de los 25 países que en el mundo destacan, y valga la palabra, por violencia de género, o sea, son los más connotados en violencia de género, de los 25 países en el mundo, 14 pertenecen a América y al Caribe. O sea, que para nosotras hoy son puntos de trabajo de nuestras organizaciones, me queda un minuto, de trabajo de nuestras organizaciones, el tema de la violencia de género, el tema de los feminicidios, el tema del acoso laboral, las migraciones, la trata de personas. Súper importante que en América no está legalizado el aborto, está legalizado el aborto solo en 7 países, que en América las mujeres no tienen igual salario por igual trabajo, que la feminización de la pobreza, por supuesto, aumenta cada día y que nuestras compañeras también tienen, por supuesto, un importante accionar desde la FEDIN para garantizar la paz total en América. Hoy nos queda el reducto de Colombia, somos veedoras del proceso de paz de Colombia y bueno, desde Cuba ratificarles la disposición a trabajar con todas las organizaciones de mujeres de América y del mundo y agradecerles nuevamente el hecho de que estemos aquí, ratificarle que las mujeres cubanas somos vencedoras de imposibles, que recientemente terminamos el Congreso y que las mujeres cubanas, como dijo Fidel en el año 64, nos mantenemos siendo hoy una revolución dentro de la revolución.
Yeah.
Thank you, Moon, Asmaida, and Alicia. It's always a joy to see you. Always a joy to hear about the amazing breakthroughs. Oh, Lesmus is here also from ECAP. Hola. Would you like to say just a very short greeting, Lesmus?
Oh, vete.
Well,
Let's introduce yourself.
thank you, everyone. It is a huge honor to be here. This amazing activity. It is my first time as part of the Cuban delegation to CWS 68, but I'm so happy to be here with my friends, my Cuban sisters, and I would like to ratify what just was said. We are here, Cuban women in advance, fighting for a better world. So thank you so much, and just let's fight. Let's continue the fight. Thank you, Cindy, for everything. Happy to see you.
Perdón.
Thank you. Thank you, Moon, for getting them all in one little room.
Oh, Cindy, abrazos, my sister. Gracias.
So, as you can see, why we're so inspired by the Federation of Cuban Women and the advancements women and girls in Cuban society in a period where women in the United States have been suffering from great setbacks. Roe versus Wade was overturned. We have lost the federal right to abortion. I actually read an article just a few days ago that France has put in its constitution the right to abortion. They said they were the first country to do it. No, they're wrong. Cuba was. So I just want to correct that. It was Cuba, a small nation, that did that a long time ago by putting it as a right for women and girls in their constitution. So now we want to turn to the next section in our webinar. Oh, wait, we have to hear from Lenny. I'm sorry, Lenny. Sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, Lenny Villagomez-Reeves, and I'm here to give you a very brief resume about the Cuban Families Code and the process of change, or how Cuba went from being a traditional homophobic macho society to the world leader in human rights, including LGBTQ+ rights and women's rights. As Fidel said, revolution is changing everything that should be changed. It is full equality and freedom. It is being treated and treating others as human beings. When the Cuban Revolution triumphed in 1959, discrimination against Black people and against women were identified as wrong and prohibited. And that took place in spite of traditional prejudices in Cuban society. But this did not occur with discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Traditional Latin American culture and the church regarded homosexuals as deviant and decadent. And after the revolution, this was not seen as one of the things that needed to be changed yet. As others have mentioned, Cuba was the first country, not just in Latin America, but in the whole Western Hemisphere, to legalize abortion. And Cuba's 1975 Constitution was a very advanced document for its time, especially with regard to women's rights. But assumptions then prevalent about heteronormativity and patriarchal family structure were included. By 1993, Cuban public policy was that homosexuality is a natural sexual orientation and that homophobia is a prejudice that should be countered by education. But public policy is one thing, and changing attitudes throughout the society is another. And it's been a long process. But Cuba, unlike the US, has consistently moved in the correct direction. In 2019, Cuba passed a new constitution by referendum after a long process of consultation with the people and revision. Public comment was heavily focused on same-sex marriage, and this is one of the sections that was revised before the referendum. The final version is, all persons have the right to establish a family. Marriage is a social and legal institution. It's one of the forms by which families can organize. And some people thought this was too vague. But then in Cuba, they went on to the process of creating a new code of family law to conform to the new constitution. The Families Code is the name of this set of laws. Código de las Familias, families plural, rather than a single model. There are over 400 articles protecting the right of all people to form a family without discrimination, updating legal definitions with inclusive models, establishing the right to a family life free from violence, and centering for everyone values of love, affection, solidarity, and responsibility. Of course, these laws recognize same-sex marriage. Marriage is the voluntary union of two people on the basis of affection, love, and mutual respect, the Families Code states. And that's only part of what's truly revolutionary in the new Families Code of Cuba. The new code gives agency to those often previously considered subjects, children, the aged, people with disabilities. And the process of creating the Families Code was as revolutionary as the content because the Cuban people discussed and rewrote the proposal that was initially drafted by their representatives. About 6 million Cubans participated in thousands and thousands of facilitated meetings. Note takers recorded and transmitted their proposals. And after this process of discussion, review, and revision, it was passed in September of 2022 by nationwide referendum with a 67% yes vote. So there's been a cultural as well as a legal transformation in Cuba from a situation in which homophobia was normalized to the present day situation where legal rights are assured and attitudes are changing or have changed. So the new Families Code in Cuba represents a great achievement for women and for the LGBTQ plus community because after a determined campaign of advocacy and education of the leaders as well as of the people of Cuba, and after waging a really intelligent battle against the religious fundamentalists who were totally opposed to the new codes being approved, over 67% of the people of Cuba voted to approve it. And many marriages have been celebrated. As in the 18 months since the code was passed, many, thousands. As an example of attitude change, the noted scholar and Afrofeminist activist Norma Gillard told me this story of one marriage, a nurse and his partner, a singer. They had waited 20 years to formalize their marriage, which they did in the Palacio de Matrimonios in an outlying district of Havana. And as they left the venue in a decorated convertible in traditional just married fashion, People in the streets and in the buses applauded them and blew kisses.
Thank you, Lenny. Always so succinct and with great information. So now we're going to turn to the section on the impacts of the blockade. And we are going to have Deb Goldman from the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and the Lesbian Allies Project, and then followed by Catherine Hall Trujillo, who's the ambassador for the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights, and then followed by Zenaida Mendez, President, National Dominican Women's Caucus. So Deb, take it away. You're on mute.
There. Thank you, Cindy. I can't say how much it is such an honor to be here and presenting with my esteemed sisters and friends from Cuba and Lenny from the US. I always learn something new from all of you, and it's truly exciting. So as Cindy said, I'm on the advisory committee for the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and co-chair of the Lesbian Allies Project. And I recently had the privilege of spending a month in Cuba, and I had the opportunity to meet with and speak to many women who told me their stories in their own words about how the blockade has affected their lives and their work and their families' lives. Many of them agreed to be videotaped, but unfortunately we don't have time to show many of them, but I will show you 2 of them. It was a wonderful and yet a worrying trip. I could give you my impressions, but it's best to let the women who live every day under this cruel and inhumane blockade to speak for themselves. So the first video is a young woman from Cienfuegos, Yenari, who's a health educator for the Department of Prevention of STIs and HIV.
Mi nombre es Yaineris Pérez Acuña. Yo trabajo en el programa de prevención de las ITS y el VIH acá en la provincia. Una de las razones que afecta el bloqueo tanto en mi labor como en mi vida personal está relacionado con la capacidad que pueda tener el país de adquirir productos que ayuden o que apoyen lo que son estos programas. Yo trabajo en la prevención y muchas veces le es muy difícil al gobierno adquirir los condones porque por terceros países cuestan a veces el doble o el triple del precio que tiene. Y esto afecta que, bueno, existan momentos en que no hayan este producto en la farmacia y afecta lo que es la prevención. En mi vida personal está relacionado principalmente con el acceso a servicios de reproducción asistida, en el cual las técnicas de alto alcance, como es la in vitro, se ha visto frenada en los últimos años debido a la falta de insumos, debido a la falta de medicamentos que le propongan a la mujer, le provoquen a la mujer esa ovulación necesaria para luego crear fertilizar ese óvulo fuera del organismo y luego introducirlo, luego pasarlo a su organismo y bueno, se pueda desarrollar este embarazo. No es algo que solo me afecta a mí, afecta a las mujeres de forma general en la prevención del VIH y otras ITS, afecta a aquellas mujeres que ya cuando llegan a edades mayores de los 30 años tienen dificultades de lograr un embarazo. Por supuesto, esto no implica que dejemos de tener esperanza en que esto se pueda resolver con la ayuda de otros pueblos, con la ayuda de otros gobiernos, a través de diferentes proyectos, lograr tener estos insumos. Por supuesto, si logramos que este bloqueo realmente dejara de funcionar, muchas de estas alternativas estuvieran a nuestro alcance.
So as Esmaida told us, we know that Cuba is on the forefront of supporting reproductive rights. And as Cindy said, in our country, we're going backwards with the Dobbs decision to get rid of Roe v. Wade, and also the recent Alabama Supreme Court decision that claims that frozen embryos qualify as children under state law and are subject to legislation dealing with the wrongful death of a minor. This is ridiculous. So we certainly could learn a lot from the progress that Cuba has made around women's rights, reproductive rights. And sadly, hearing from Yanari that it's difficult for them to get the reproductive health care they need because of the blockade and lack of supplies. So the next video is a story from a well-known rapper poet in Havana named Mahia. Let's take a listen.
Mi nombre es Magia, soy parte de un grupo de hip hop cubano llamado Obsesión. Vivo en Centro Habana, Cayo Hueso, y bueno, voy a hablar de algunas de las diferentes maneras en que el bloqueo ha afectado mi vida y el entorno, ¿no? En ese sentido. Yo nací bajo el bloqueo, por tanto he tenido que tomar mucha conciencia de que es algo que existe, porque mucha gente lo ha naturalizado. Y en ese sentido también se ha politizado mucho, pero es real que afecta el bloqueo a mucha gente en particular. Por ejemplo, voy a remitirme a los 2 años de pandemia que tuvimos hace muy poco, y han sido 2 años en que se ha afectado la entrada de medicina, de alimentos a Cuba, en un momento en que no había conexión con el mundo, todo estaba cerrado, y me parece injusto no hacer una pausa en este tiempo para colaborar, para ayudar a Cuba de una manera efectiva. No pudimos recibir medicina, a no ser de países que sí estuvieron como muy firmes en la posición de poder ayudar a Cuba con medicina, con alimentos, con recursos, ¿no? Que eran necesarios en esos momentos y que nosotros no podíamos producir, ni podíamos comprar, ni nada. Mi música, por ejemplo, es limitada para que otras personas del mundo puedan escucharla, porque hay plataformas que no permiten el acceso de Cuba, porque estaba bloqueado, no permiten el acceso para que se pueda escuchar libremente mi música. Por tanto, tenemos que usar otros mecanismos para poder acceder a esas plataformas que hacen como esa promoción, ¿no? De nuestra música, y también es una manera de ingresar o de generar ingresos para nosotros seguirnos desarrollando. Entonces no es posible para nosotros como cubanos poder tener esos accesos, ¿no? Y limita mucho nuestro alcance. Nos valemos mucho de amigos, de personas que ayudan para poder seguir amplificando y ampliando, promocionando nuestra música y poder seguir llegando a otros lugares. Pero una cosa muy cerquita, que me llega muy de cerca, por ejemplo, en mi esquina yo tengo un hospital, tengo un policlínico, y en ese policlínico no hay una cosa tan elemental como es un efimo para tomar la presión, ¿no? Es como tomar la presión, no existe. Entonces, cosas que son básicas para primeros auxilios, no existe. Entonces, eso ha sido una complicación para nosotros, para poder nosotros tener como un desarrollo digno, digamos, y poder tener como conocer una Cuba sin bloqueo. Ese sería mi sueño, ese es mi sueño.
So that's Mahia. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about her and her hip hop group, it's www.obsession, OBSESION, hiphopcuba.com. So I want to give a thank you to these 2 women, as well as others, for being willing to tell their stories. And I'm not a videographer, so sorry for the quality, but I also want to thank Catherine Murphy and her staff with the Literacy Project for helping to put the subtitles in, and for Lenny for helping with the translation, and also Arnold Trujillo for helping also with some of the translation. And of course, we share the dream of ending the blockade so that these and the other women that I got to interview can live to their fullest potential. I also want to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about another group that I talked to called Afro Diverse Project. This is an Afro LGBTQ plus initiative whose purpose is to empower and make visible Afro LGBTQ people by means of a collaborative and participatory anti-racist and Afro-feminist approach from three fundamental premises: art, health, and community. These women are doing amazing work in their community. And among the topics I discussed with them is how the Families Code in the Constitution, which we heard from Alicia, how comprehensive it really is, and also from Lenny. But I wanted to know from them how the Families Code, with the increased protection in their LGBTQ rights, has affected them and their communities. And some of the benefits that they mentioned have also been discussed, were the egalitarian marriage, which protects us in conserving the assets that a couple has built up over time and gives us assurance of mutual economic support. They also told me that the legal support helps them to create a family without any limitation. They can adopt, have a pregnancy by assisted reproduction or artificial insemination. And I quote, another woman said, "In general, we have some protection that leads to everybody respecting us, because now that they know there is a requirement that this respect must exist." And with that, I'd like to put in a brief plug for our U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration Lesbians and Allies project. We're currently recruiting more women to join our cause. Maybe somebody could put a link in the chat, the lesbiansanallies@gmail.com. You can get a hold of us and we can tell you how you can support us, how you can join our work, and help us to fight for the end of the blockade. So in closing, I just want to say that our friends and many of the women I met and talked to about the blockade and the Families Code had shown me such gracious hospitality, sharing with me sometimes the little that they had in spite of the blockade. I've seen their amazing creativity, their innovation, their resiliency. They are truly forward-thinking, as you heard from Osmaida and Alicia, and they're committed to independence, social justice, and peace. So please join our movement to fight to end the U.S. blockade so they can live to their fullest potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. And now I want to bring on Catherine Hall Trujillo, who's joining us all the way from Cuba. And glad you could make it, Catherine.
And if for some reason, because my connection has been really, really bad, Cindy, as Maxine Waters would say, you can have my time.
And I told her no one can replace Catherine.
But I have spent the afternoon trying to make this happen, which just really brings home just when we always talk about the blockade in economic terms, but we don't talk about how it affects all of those little things that impact your life. And so just having an ability to have free access to the internet and be able to things like this is a privilege when you don't have access to it, and how much you're cut off and isolated from the rest of the world. So I was being so desperate trying to be a part of this conversation, but so were a lot of other people that wanted to be here, but could not have the opportunity to do so. I want to say that during the last year, I've been appointed an ambassador to Cuba by FIRE, the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights. And that appointment has raised the question of whether or not I am now acting as an agent of Cuba. So after talking to my Congress people and giving this a lot of thought, I've come to the conclusion that one of the most patriotic things I can do as a citizen of the United States is to educate myself and to help educate other people about the issues that we need to know about so that we could participate in the process of government. And so this is actually probably one of the most patriotic duties that I can do at this point, is to be here and to share this information, not with the Cubans, because the Cubans already know what's going on. We kind of think we know what's going on, but we have to take what we think is going on and walk our talk, to actually do something, to actually be involved, to actually exercise that right that we're so proud of having the right to vote. We need to be very involved in this. And so I think that what I'm really doing is talking to my sisters tonight, because the issue that we are really facing is the current US policy of implementing and maintaining a blockade against Cuba and designating her as a terrorist country. And for those of you who know me, you know I've spent the last 23 years actually on the ground in Cuba, not just coming to visit or go dancing or look at the culture or whatever, but because I got here, because I'm a midwife that has a clinic that couldn't afford to have a doctor because doctors could not afford to work for clinics like mine. And when I found out that Cuba had offered the United States 500 medical school scholarships to become doctors and then to go back to the US unencumbered with debt, I was here before the students were here, because I thought, oh my God, I might get a doctor out of this. And oh my God, I'd get a doctor out of this. The organization I founded now has a medical director, actually an international medical director, thanks to Cuba, who is an Elam physician. But also, one of the things that happened when our doctors came back is I truly understood that having a lot of doctors wasn't really going to help if we didn't help change the system. And so Cuba has been gracious to let me become a professor and teach public health to public health graduate students, nurses, and to policymakers. So what I'm saying is that I've been on the ground in Cuba for 23 years. Actually, every day I'm here, I'm working side by side with Cubans. We live with Cubans because our dormitory is now closed at the university because of the impact of the blockade. We're like everybody else trying to get transportation. Our students are like anyone else that's trying to get medicine. You know, it's not something we heard about. It's something that we live every single day. But quickly, you heard me say I'm a midwife. And as a midwife, I don't just help women birth their babies, but I support them in actualizing their dreams of what a baby is. Babies don't stay babies. Babies grow into children. Babies grow into our families. Babies are our hopes and dreams of a future. And one of the things that you will find in anybody's office or space who helps bring babies in the world are those pictures of these babies growing up and graduating from high school and doing whatever. What I've come to understand with the time I've been in Cuba is that that dream has been disrupted, not only by the women who are deciding I cannot have a baby because of the impact of the blockade, but the women who have had babies and are now watching their babies grow up and leave the country, not because they hate Cuba, but because they're looking for economic opportunity. And so that idea of what your family looks like really didn't have the dream of your family would be on the other side of the world and you would be left here. Also, it's the children whose families, the parents are going to another country, primarily the United States, looking for economic opportunities where they're going to one day reunite with the family or send money home, as difficult as it is to send money home. It's the disruption of that dream of what a family is. And there are lots of ways to destroy a country. In the blockade language that you can find on Google, it says in one paragraph, the purpose of the blockade is to cause so much economic crises that people will turn against their government and overthrow their government. That has not happened. But what has happened is killing me softly, of actually destroying the primary structure of what a family is and what a family means. And a family is the heartbeat of a country. The thing that really gives me hope is that I hear women in the Women's Federation say, but we are not offering our children up to the US on a silver platter. And their determination to stay and struggle and be defiant and resistant in terms of holding on to a country that maintains the values that they fought for, turns out not to be just something that benefits the country of Cuba, but it benefits the people in the United States as well that are now having to deal with, as you can see, those same issues that women thought they would never have to fight over reproductive rights. People thought they would never have to fight over the right to vote. People never thought they would have to fight over whether or not an embryo was a child and had more rights than the adult who was carrying the child in their body. And if we don't take heed and notice from what Cuba, and especially the women and children who are most impacted by this inhumane blockade, are demonstrating, then we will certainly perish. I don't think the Cubans are going to perish, because inside of the resistance and the defiance is also that thing of holding on to the joy, holding on to the things that give you a reason to get up tomorrow. And when I talk to my grandchildren and my students, the young people that I'm dealing with are feeling helpless, are feeling hopeless, are feeling like we have bad choices and no choices, and we're not going to be involved in what's going on. So this model of, actually, as hard as it is, but having a model, as all of you have said, of the best that can happen if in a country that is in resistance to one of the strongest powers on the planet, that they could still have the best place, the best country on the planet for a Black baby to be born in spite of it all, that they could still have that equal, a majority of women in their legislature than most countries. I think there's only 2 that have more. To be implementing the Beijing Women's Platform, to be doing all the things that they are doing, that comes from something that we need to figure out what that inner thing is, where that light is that they are holding, and figure out how to understand from what they're modeling, how to do the work of not only supporting the Cubans, but of supporting the US as we go through this period of our own time of conflict and our own time of having to learn how to really be involved in the government of our country. Because when we get involved in the government of our country, we are going to make sure that the blockade goes away. We're going to make sure that Cuba is off the terrorist list, because we are going to really understand that part of our story is the Cuban women's story. It's not an outside story, a book that we're reading. It's something that's a part of us. And when we claim our Cuban sisters as our sisters, we are going to stand up and give them the support that they need. And in doing that, we're going to strengthen ourselves. And I want to thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to be here and say thank you. The last thing I would want to say is I'm here with a group of students from a university. And when we had our orientation yesterday, there were 3 generations of Cubans there. We were fortunate enough to see the women who trained the first group of Cuban doctors and public health people. They're still living. They're my age. I'm 70 something. Those are women who were here after the revolution and had to put the country together. And then we see the doctors and the public health people and the nurses and the system that they developed. They're still here. And then I'm looking at this 3rd generation, and all I could do was cry, because the 3rd generation has been doing this long enough that they can look at what they're doing and they know where they need to make changes. They know what they need to do it better. And it's so unfortunate at this moment in time is when the blockade and being on that list is so hard that it's really, really pushing people to the edge. So I say to my sisters, it's time to walk our talk. We know what's going on. It's time to get with it, because if we stand and watch this happen to Cuba, you know we'll be next. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for making the effort to being here today. I know it was hard, and always wonderful to have you with us to share your words and thoughts. So our last speaker is Zenaida. Zenaida, are you here still?
Yes, I am. Uh-oh, I don't know what happened with that.
You're on.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Muy buenas noches. Una encantada de estar aquí con ustedes. Well, I am very, very happy that we are doing this once again. I think it's critical for us to communicate in turn that people understand that some of us might be a little bit more comfortable where we are, but there's so many that are not. And we are going backward in the United States, 50, 60 years back. So I tell people that I was marching 40 years ago. Now my granddaughter, who's 9 years old, gonna have to march, for the same thing that I marched 40 years ago. I mean, I did it because I wanted a better word for them and make it easy. And now look what happened. So this is really, really bad. I would like very much to invite all of you, March 22nd and March 23rd, the National Dominican Women Caucus is holding a Latina Summit in New York City. Estamos haciendo una cumbre de mujeres latinas líderes en la ciudad de Nueva York. Están todos invitados. It's going to take place at John Jay College of Criminal Justice on 524 West 59th Street between 10th and 11th Avenue in Manhattan. We are bringing a spectacular, women's. Issy Campbell from Costa Rica will be here. Edith Feble from Dominican Republic. And all the New York City elected officials are invited. But among them speaking, going to be Amanda Setimo, who is a young elected Latina in the New York State Assembly. Well, it's 21 of them. And most of them will be participating. On Friday, the 22nd, is from 6 to 9. So we will have a recession with all the elected Latinas that are coming and our guests. And then on Saturday, March 23rd, it will be from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to about 8:30 in the evening, where we're going to have 4 panels. We are going to focus on mental health. Why? As you might know, after the pandemic, the number of people with anxiety and depression is big. And our children especially were very concerned about that. So we really wanted to do that. We also want to focus on education. We feel that the lack of high quality education in the United States, in New York City, the capital of the world. So imagine what's going on in developing country. We are going to also focus on affordable housing. We have a very short affordable housing in New York City. But when we talk about education, we have over 250 million of people who cannot write and read, who don't have access to education. So what do? I think that we have to call for more training for teachers. We have to make education accessible. Without education, we cannot move forward, especially women and girls. So we need to do that. That is a call for action, the what we need to do. It is critical that we do that. Like I said, when we talk about the proportion, we have a 31% in the Sahara, the people who don't have access to education, 3% in 3% in Europe and North America, but that's high for a developed country. So we need to train more teachers. We need to read more readings. We need to open make sure that we have rough for access to school. And the main thing is that it will be illegal for children to work. Children should be going to school. So this is one of the things that is important among so many other. When we talk about how we advance women's leadership and political participation, we at the National Dominican Women Caucus, we have a Civic Engagement Institute. That Civic Engagement Institute so for women to understand the importance for them to be at the political table, making decisions. Right now in New York State, in New York City, we're going through a budget. What is the first thing that they cut? Education, the arts, the sports. So we need to make sure that we are at the table when those decisions are made. Let's say in the Dominican Republic, I just saw a debate for the senator of Santo Domingo, 7 men, no women. And only one of the men was pro-choice. Everyone is against las tres causales. So it is we're really going backward. So what we propose is more training for women and for women to really do like Francia Marquez in Colombia, who even though she's risking her life, she knows that we have to do it. We have to be at the table when decisions are made. That is critical. And women face many roadblocks, structural barriers for us to be part of that table where decisions are made. We need a capacity in the gap for women are less likely than men to have education, contact, and resources. So we need to talk about politics. We need to talk politics. People say, oh, I don't like politics. Everything is politics. Where you go shopping is politics. Everything that you do. So we need to encourage and support more of us. We have, for example, in New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we defeated a congressman who was there for 22 years. How did she do it? She raised more people to vote, young people. We all gave, $1 a day. So he was cheating her millions of dollars. It was working class people and a student who helped her. And she won that seat, and she's doing a great job. So we have the Political Training Institute, Margarita Lopez, who's a former city council woman and who is independentista from Puerto Rico. She's one of the people who helping us with that. Diane Morales, who ran for mayor of the city of New York last year. She's also training Black and brown women to run for office because that's where the decisions are made. So we need to do that. Economic empowerment, investing in women's economic empowerment sets a direct path toward gender equality, poverty eradication, and inclusive economic growth. We need to demand economic power. How? It's very easy when the governments have loan grants, incentive for women to open their own businesses, incentive for women to get education so that they can really, grow economically. That's critical. Without education, without economic power, it's going to be very hard for billions of women and girls who don't have access to either of those. So what can we do? This kind of forum, everywhere we speak, we have to talk about political power. We recognize, say, oh no, I don't want to be elected. You know what? We have to be there. We're 52% of the population, and we give birth to the other 48%. So we need to do that. Violence against women, ending violence against women, we need to continue to talk about that. We need to train more men and more women. So when somebody calls there's something happening in the home, that there are people who can deal with that situation of violence in the home. That when a woman go to complain to a prison, that there is someone expert who can really help. We cannot continue to have all this violence against women and very little happen. And I'm gonna give you an example. Last 2 weeks ago in the Dominican Republic, a woman who used to complain, she was working in a factory at night so that she can go to college during the day. So she complained of sexual harassment, nobody paid attention. She was there complaining. Do you know when they paid attention? When they found her dead. She was killed, somebody killed her because she complained about her bosses harassing her at work. You know, and then they go 1 minute of silence. You know what? 1 minute of silence after you already dead. Why didn't you do something before? So we need to speak up. We need to do more training, you know, law enforcement, ambulances, when everyone has to know what to do. And I have to tell you, here in New York for a long while, a lot of African-American family would not call the police because the police would come ready to kill and made it worse for all of us. So we need to, the call for action is for us to always speak up, to write letters. We have to write to a representative. And let me tell you, taking care of our young people, our babies, affordable child care, that is a must. I tell women, if someone is running for office and this is not the #1 issue, do not vote for that person. You have all these people running for office, and none of them, or very few of them, have our issues in their agenda. And we continue to vote for them, oh, because I like him or her, or because she's Puerto Rican or Cuban. You know what? It doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. If you don't have our agenda and your platform, do not contribute to that person. That's what we have to do. So our call for action is that we, you know, it's so many of us, everyone in this Zoom can be elected and do a good job. We cannot continue meeting here every year, you know, do everything that we do. We have to be at this decision table. We have to encourage the new generation. Right now, I'm working with about 7 young women, you know, and that we're gonna be doing more political training, you know, and they don't have to start by being president. They have to start just being in charge of the block, in charge of the building where they live. So you don't have to be president or senator or congressperson. But if you know what's going on in your neighborhood, you can do something. So this is my call for action. This is what I recommend global. This is global. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, over 500 million women and girls with no access to education, no access to medical health, no access to economic empowerment. So, like I said, we have to continue to fight this blockade to Cuba. How can every single year the majority of the members of the United Nations vote to end the blockade? Only 3 countries vote against it and they don't do it. So why do we have the United Nations? What for? Tell me, somebody tell me. Why do we have NATO? So we have more war, so we have all these national, international organizations. Look what's going on with Haiti right now. So we have to continue to talk. We have to say it the way it is. Now that I'm a senior citizen, I feel that I can say whatever I want. Even though I always said it. But this is important. And thank you much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's very important. And we should do it more often, not only once a year. And please, all of you who are in New York City, March 22nd and March 23rd, we're gonna be at John Jay College. And I invite all of you, you're gonna meet brilliant, great women who are fighting and advocating, and especially all those elected Latinas who are doing great job. All of them, because this is what we do. You're not doing your job, we're taking you out. And we bring in somebody else who replace you. No matter whether you're Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, whatever. You're not doing your job, you're out. And we bring in somebody who's gonna do it. That's the way we are acting now. We cannot continue this way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zenaida. You should be mayor of New York.
You never know, who knows?
Yes.
There's still time, there's still
There's still
time.
time, there's still time. So we are actually out of time. And so Jan and I have decided to, and unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A. And it's rather strange that there are no questions in the chat. Maybe through our program, we
We
answer
have
all
about
your
50 people on the chat. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, and very few dropped off. So I want to first, I just want to leave you with a few action items because that's what this is all about. As Zenaida said, we have to take action. And so one of the first actions we really need to do is take Cuba off the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. It's a policy that the Trump administration began and the Biden administration continues. And so we need you to write your Congress people and to the president demanding that they end this policy and they remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Secondly, in addition, we need you to lobby your congressional delegation and work with ASERI, which is the Cuban slang for friend, the Alliance for Cuba Engagement and Respect, ASERI. And you can go to their website, aseri.org. And currently ASERI is asking people to sign a letter to Congress called the United Voice for Change, a call to revisit US-Cuba policy. And that letter is on their website, and we want you to go on and sign it. It's open to anyone to sign, but if you know Cuban Americans, please sign that letter. Second to the last, travel to Cuba, see for yourself, educate yourselves, take others with you. There are many, many delegations still going, even in spite of the US blockade that makes it so difficult to travel to Cuba. Mayday delegations, building relations with Cuban labor, the Venceremos Brigade, Witness for Peace, and if US Women in Cuba Collaboration and Wolf's Committee can get it together, we're going to do a delegation this year, probably towards the end of the year. And you heard about all of the difficulties the US blockade is creating, shortages or just no medications as simple as aspirin. People are dying. People are dying. They can't get cancer medications for their children or adults. But there are groups still trying to bring as much medical aid, as many items as that they can. One of the groups, Puentes de Amor and Code Pink, just got back from bringing 3,000 pounds of powdered milk to Camagüey and Ciego in Cuba. Another group is Global Health Partners, who has been sending medical shipments to Cuba since 1994, and they are continuing to send medical equipment and medicines. So you can go on their website, Global Health Partners, and assist in sending money to that organization to help their wonderful sending of medical shipments. And any delegation or anybody that's going to Cuba should take with them items, as much supplies as they can. Lastly, women have we have our own particular needs, such as menstrual supplies, natural or prescription medicines to deal with menopause, condoms to prevent pregnancies, vitamins to take, especially during pregnancies. All of this you can do, whether or not you go to Cuba, if you know people that are going or support the delegations. And lastly, this weekend, There's an online and in-person conference in New York City, Conference on Cuba, where the Federation of Cuban Women will be presenting again, and a discussion on building solidarity with the Cuban labor movement. You can go to us-cubanormalization.org to register, and you must register for this conference for security reasons. Lastly, we'll be sending out a thank you letter to all of you with this information of how you can support Cuba, as well as the link to this webinar so that you can share it with others. It will be on our YouTube, and all of this information will be available in the email that we'll send. And stay active and do what you can to change U.S. foreign policy. And lastly, we must free Palestine. We must support the Palestinian people. Cuba has done for many, many decades, supporting the struggle of the Palestinian people. And we must stop this genocide that is going now on in Gaza. And we must continue also to send our support, to send material aid, and to end this occupation, to end this war, to end the genocide against the Palestinian people. Free Palestine. And thank you all for coming, especially to the Cubans. Can we have one more highlight of the Cubans, if they're still here?
Yeah, they want to talk for a minute. Habla.
Okay, please.
Well, hello everyone. On behalf of the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the People, on behalf of the Cuban Women Federation, on behalf of the Cuban people, thank you to U.S. people for the solidarity. Thank you for all the support you have given to us all these years. And thank you for everything. We are just here fighting. And please, as Maida says, and all the people said, Alicia, just come to Cuba and see our own reality by your own eyes. So thank you for everything. Everyone is welcome in Cuba.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amy Leong, for helping and for doing this webinar. Without Amy, we would not be on this screen today. Thank you. And thank you to Caridad and Ricardo for their interpretation services. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.